Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth with your host, Dr. Joel Hunter.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Joel Hunter, host of Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth. On today's program, we have with us two very good friends of mine, Danny DeArmas, who's a senior associate pastor at First Baptist Orlando, and Lynette Fields, executive director of community transformation at St. Luke's United Methodist Church. And I'm looking forward to learning from these two great, compassionate leaders, both of whom are pillars in our community when it comes to helping those that are vulnerable. And that's what this program really is about, powerful people who use their power for people without power. So thank you for what you're doing. Let me start with you, Danny.
Sure.
Danny is just so key in our community. He heads the Faith Council Committee. What is
Faith
that?
Committee, we call it.
Faith Committee for the Commission on Homelessness of Central Florida. And tell us about the work that these various religious representatives are doing.
So the commission has a few committees that kind of expand the opportunity for the commission to inform our community and learn from the people that are impacted the most or serving those in need. And so the Faith Committee is a broad coalition of members, all different faith communities that are seeking to, and our goals are to educate, to equip, and to empower the broader community, and we're really focusing on the people trying to help. Mm-hmm. So community leaders, government leaders, business leaders. And so our first real initiatives that started in the last 2 years is to try to educate, and that's where we've focused for the last couple of years, to try to create a common vernacular, a common understanding of the challenges that those in poverty are facing. Yeah. And we've made some good progress. There's a long way to go yet, but I'm really pleased with the progress that we've made and the understanding, the common understanding that we're developing.
Well, and you talk about education, and Lynette, you are spearheading one of the premier educational tools that we have in this area when it comes to poverty. People don't just read books on poverty and understand it. Right. The most effective educational tool we have is one that helps them experience what other people are going through. Could you tell us about COPE, what it stands for, and then what it is?
Yes, it's called COPE is for Cost of Poverty Experience. And it was about 6-7 years ago, we thought we needed to train the volunteers at our church better, and we really stumbled upon this curriculum, and then we've just realized how incredibly helpful it is, way beyond volunteers at one local church. And Cost of Poverty Experience, you, as a participant, you get a profile of a real family. We have real low-income families who have gifted their story to COPE. And then you have a month, which is represented in 4 15-minute increments, to do what you need to do, pay your bills, go to school, visit the probation officer, buy groceries. And it sounds simple, but when you have limited resources, it's anything but simple.
Yeah.
And I think even for those of us that have worked in this area for a long time, I'm a social worker by training, it's constantly surprising about the obstacles that are in the community that make life even more difficult for our citizens who are low income.
Yeah. Tell me how many people in this area have gone through that experience?
Just in the last 15 months, we've had over 800 people.
800, and that's these awesome. Are leaders. These are community leaders that have been recruited out of law enforcement, out of education, out of the faith community, out of the government, political leadership. Yeah, right. And so it's really fun to see commissioners go through this and have to, they're now a part of a family or or they're single and they've got a police record, that they're having to overcome. Because that's the role that they're playing?
Well, and we've worked with a lot of law enforcement. And so actually in the Cost of Poverty Experience, you have a jail and you have a police officer. And we've had
And a judge.
and a judge.
Yeah.
We've had uniformed police officers end up in our Cope jail. You know, and so they know how it works, and
Yeah.
it's still they aren't able to avoid some of the things that happen when you just have a lot of barriers
Yeah.
in your life. And sometimes it's individual choices.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you choose different things that may get you on the wrong side of the law.
Right.
And sometimes there are factors that are happening around you that are kind of beyond your control.
Yeah.
And you get to experience both.
Yeah.
And the hope is that you deepen your empathy. What we've done with the Faith Committee and the Commission on Homelessness, and why we pulled together leaders, is how can we come together as leaders in the community? Are there things that we might change?
Mm-hmm.
Are there barriers that we could take down and eliminate?
Mm-hmm.
And if we can get the people who have the most power
Mm-hmm.
in our community coming together, using the same vernacular, shared experience, then maybe we can start to have some different kind of conversation
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
community.
And they have a common understanding. I think the word I hear the most often from first-time participants in COPE is, this is confusing.
Yeah.
This is so confusing. And then you start to realize, wow, it is confusing. I don't have an advocate. I don't have anybody navigating for
Right.
me. Nobody knows the answers to the questions. When do they
Right.
open? When do they close? Where do I go for this? How do I get there? Do I need to do this? It's confusing.
Yeah.
And when you realize that living in poverty in our community, anywhere really, but in our community, is confusing to people.
Yeah.
That it's not that they choose to be desperate,
Yeah.
right? It's that it's confusing.
Yeah.
And when you're in great need, that confusion is exaggerated tremendously because the clock is ticking, and you got your next meal to worry about, you got where we're going to spend the night tonight, and you got school and maybe work if you're lucky.
Yeah.
The pressure is incredible. And in COPE, we actually see the pressure mounting. It seems really fun and easy when you start in
Yeah.
it, but then you go, wait a second, now I've got to do something. Something's
Yeah.
got to change, and it's really impactful.
And this is just a month. So one of the things we ask at the end is, did you make it through? Did you pay all your bills? And could you do it again next month? Right?
Yeah.
And many times you've spent all your resources, you've pawned the things that you have in your home, you've spent all your resources, even thinking about doing it over again
Yeah.
the next month becomes
Yeah.
really overwhelming for the
Yeah.
participants. And this is just it's a simulation.
Oh, exactly.
And the feeling, you feel it.
We've all been through it, and you really experience it and you don't realize, being a provider or a helper, you don't realize as you go through there are certain prerequisites to even get the help. You've got to get transportation.
Right.
You've got and that takes time, and you're working against the clock because there's only so many hours this is available, and jobs go fast, and then it wasn't just the going through it as a as a person needing help, but then they recruit us, don't they, to
They
be
do. To be on the provider side.
on the other side, and and part of the instruction is you got to be stern. You can't be, well, two pastors.
Right.
How are you going to not give them a store, for crying out loud?
Right.
Danny and I were in a thing, and I just couldn't, hear,
Yeah, right.
but there's an additional barrier in that people with either a different color skin, people with a record of some sort,
Right.
are wearing a colored band, and they may or may not know. Do they know
They
why
don't
they
know.
have it?
No, they
So
don't.
they don't know why they
Now
have
Yes,
it.
sir.
now
Told
they
them.
do, because
Yeah.
you just told them.
Oh, sorry, sorry. But you're instructed to
Right.
not treat them very well
Right.
because they've, that's the experience many of them have in the community.
Right.
So it's even more difficult.
Yeah.
Joel, for me, I think the saddest moment for me in this was, I think Lynette was scheming behind the scenes on this, but they actually asked me to play the role of the pastor of the church in the community. And so and you have such limited resources. You just don't have any resources to give.
Right.
And I found myself saying, well, I can pray for you, but I can't give you anything. Well, those are empty words.
Yeah.
You know?
That's tough.
And so having to role play what I actually do was probably the hardest for me.
Wow.
Because I realized how empty the words are.
Yeah.
There's not much there. If you're not helping, the words don't mean anything.
Which brings us back to the main theme here, and that is, how can we build something so that those words aren't empty because the resources are available because we're all working together. And because the experience of so many who are listening is that they go to those churches that, we can give them a bag of food, maybe a bus pass, but we don't know what to do other than that.
Right.
And so what are some of the plans that you all see that can make not only our community more effective and our provider agencies have some relief and some alternatives, but have churches, churches of 50 people, so that they're a part of something that can say more than, I will pray for you?
To me, we're already starting because we're talking to each other more. I think through the faith committee, but also just through the commission, over 440 leaders, I think, have done COPE, and then we've done COPE beyond the faith committee. But being in the circle talking to each other, we get to know each other better. So what happens in the cost of poverty experience is a person in this resource doesn't know what the person across town does.
Right.
So we get around the table and we start to learn what each other's organizations do. That helps. Even that helps. And then we need to talk about some of the systemic barriers. What is it that happens that makes it so hard for people who have a job, to be able to pay rent? And so, I hope we can start talking about rent. And we know there's a housing shortage. Not only is rent really expensive, we know that, but we also just don't have enough units for the number of people who live in this area. So that makes it harder for our most vulnerable to be able to find a decent place to live, even when they have a job. And we know that if you're on minimum wage, it takes at least 2 adult incomes working full time to cover the smallest of apartments that you might be able to rent in this community. So is that just an individual challenge, that we put on the people who are lowest income, or is that something as a community, particularly as a faith community, that we can start to talk about?
I think one of the things that's happening, not among faith communities, but just in the broader community, is a more coordinated plan of entry, so that no matter where somebody's first stop is, they're coordinating between the different service providers, and there's some sort of direction given, some sort of map that says, okay, here are the services that are available to you. As that makes its way through Community Resource Network to the faith communities, I think we're going to be able to unleash a real mass of people, not just agencies, who can help.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think the faith communities of Central Florida can make the biggest difference, because there are so many thousands of people who have tender hearts for people in need, who have compassion and want to help, just don't know exactly what to do. And so if we can somehow find people who want to help and match them with needs that they can help, I think we're going to see a lot of improvement in the areas of need. But having something coordinated, so if somebody shows up at St. Luke's, that's a few miles away from First Baptist, they have a way to know, have they been to First Baptist, and what help did they receive at First Baptist? Or we may say, hey, you know what, we know St. Luke's has a program for what your need is, so let us call ahead and make arrangements for you. Do you need transportation to get there? We can help you get there. But there's help at St. Luke's, not just, You know, I feel sometimes we send them on a wild goose chase. Okay, here's 6 different places. Good luck, and they're just, it's too confusing.
Yeah.
They can't do it.
Yeah.
And even churches can have a continuum of services. Not every church needs to have a food pantry.
Right.
Right.
So if we know which churches have a food pantry, we can send them there when they need food.
No need to duplicate it 7 times,
But
right.
if somebody needs help with budgeting, maybe there is almost enough money coming in, right? Then another church can do financial literacy.
Yeah.
But if we don't talk to each other and coordinate, we can't do that.
Right.
So I think through the commission and the faith committee, we can help create a conversation that we really need in this community to do that.
And I think another thing that's happening from the commission side, you know, the initiative is housing first. If somebody's homeless, the first step is put them in a home. It used to be the other way around. Let's do all the social service stuff, and the last step was a home.
Right.
And so best practices are you put them in a home first. Well, in Central Florida, that's difficult because we have a shortage of homes, of housing. And so, but one of the appeals that the commission made was to landlords. Landlords are in a position to help. They can get guaranteed rent assistance from the government for low-income families, but they just need to be motivated. Well, guess what? Faith communities have the ability, have an audience, and many of our churches have landlords in them, right? And so those faith communities of all different faiths can appeal to their constituents, the people who attend their houses of worship, and say, listen, this is a cause worth doing. So take a percentage of the inventory that you have as a landlord and dedicate it to this. And if we can get them in houses first and then provide a coordinated services of support to help them, it makes a big difference in these lives.
Absolutely.
Big difference, especially for the families that are the hardest to deal with.
Well, and we've all talked before that the faith communities is where all the sectors meet already. So we're in a perfect position to really accelerate this conversation within the community because the business leaders, the landlords, the nonprofit organizations, and the philanthropists. Not everybody, but we definitely have a cross-section within our communities already.
It's the broadest cross-section
It
in
is.
the faith communities.
Well, then you're the community transformation person. So I want to, and you really do. You know, Danny and I as pastors, we do have the big picture in mind and our community in our heart. But you actually have the education and know the different components. Could you just tell us what are some of the different components that we need to have active and coordinated in our community to really address the larger problem of vulnerability, not just homelessness, but the marginalized populations that we have living among us, the vulnerable that we have living among us. What are some of the things that we as a community need to address? Go ahead.
So one of the things that I think is most evident is how isolated we live from one another. And that's not just people who are low income, but those of us who are middle class or upper middle class live in our own little bubbles as well. So breaking out of that isolation, I think, is really important. I think COPE helps us understand that, and I hope it empowers us then to take the next step, which is, who do you know by name? What is it personal to you? Do you have a friendship or a connection with somebody who's low income? And when you start to develop that relationship, what you're doing is expanding the person who is low income, expanding their social capital. And we've talked about social capital before, but when you're isolated, you don't have those relationships. And social capital is just simply knowing people who broaden your connections. So we talk about bonding, bridging, and linking social capital. So bonding is knowing people who are in the same situation. That can be helpful because you can increase your resourcefulness. Your bridging is building relationships with people who are in a different demographic. And I also think the church, the faith community as a whole, we're ultimately about relationships.
Right.
So building those friendships, I think, can be one of the best things that we do. And then there really are some systemic things as well. One of the things that I've learned about in the last 4 years that I didn't realize was so harmful are high interest loans and predatory lending, payday lending.
Yeah.
You know, and what happens is you end up paying such a high percentage of interest that it makes it really, really difficult, if not impossible, to ever pay off that base debt that you had.
Yeah.
And so looking at that, can we come together as a community and look at that? And then we need funding for more housing. And that's something I know that we're going to talk about more this year.
Yeah.
But those are things, you know, building social capital, getting out of the isolation, looking at some of those big barriers that are really hard for people to ever climb over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Joel, I would
Yeah.
add, you know, you actually brought me into this conversation several years ago because you were leading the faith committee at the time and invited me to participate. And I remember back then, Lynette was saying the same thing she's saying now. But in the broader community, the faith committee, there were ears, but in the broader community, nobody was listening.
Right. Right.
And so I want to commend her first because she's the smart one in the bunch.
I know where we're going. Lynette, what should we do? That's our motto.
And she's the one who has helped us understand the complexity of this, and that it's not just more money.
Yeah.
It's not just give them food. It's a complex issue. It requires sophisticated mechanisms to fix. The things that she's talking about right now, this is on the horizon for us. These are things that we have to deal with, or the problem's going to get worse. And if we can deal with them, and if we do, we'll be making huge progress.
Well, and here's what's fascinating to me. You know, along the lines of Ruby Payne's Understanding Poverty, she talks about how isolating poverty is, and just exactly what you said. People are missing the resources of relationships. But you know, our institutions are too, because our institutions are just as isolated, and they are going to be more ineffective to the degree they're more isolated from one another. That they don't work together, that they don't understand what each other does. And so that's where you guys are just doing a lion's work in this community. You're just really making those connections.
Well, and Ruby Payne and a lot of schools have done that work. There's training called Bridges Out of Poverty. It talks about the hidden rules between classes. If you can break that code, you really empower people. And that's really helpful. And then another term that we talk about is beyond benevolence. It's great that we have a heart of offering food. That's what the scriptures tell us. Feed those who are hungry, give drink to those who are thirsty. But there's more. There's more to help people have a full, thriving, whole life. And I think we're in a great position to be able to help offer that.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, man, we're getting so close to the end here, and I hate this because I've got so many more questions. But let me just close us with this. It's incredible belonging to a community that really does want to cooperate.
Right.
We've got we're all friends.
Right.
I love it when I see either one of you come into the room. I just think, oh, good, things just got better. And we've got that general advantage in this community. Danny, how long have you been in Orlando?
I've actually been here since 1969. I went away for school for a little while, but I've been here since came to Orlando as a second grader.
Okay. And how about you, Lynette?
I just started my 23rd year here.
Okay. All right. You're down from Indiana.
Yes.
Okay.
Via Miami first.
Oh, via Miami. Okay. Very
yes.
good. Very good. And I've been here for over 30 years. And so we've come a long way in our relationships and in our cooperation. And I just, I'm absolutely thrilled to be working with you guys. And can't tell you how much I appreciate your gifts and talents and your role in this community. So, Danny, Lynette, thank you for being on, and thank you for doing what you're doing. And It's onward and upward for the
That's
sake
right.
of those that are downward and outward.
Absolutely.
All right. We're out of time, but I want to thank you and our panelists, Danny DeArmas and Lynette Fields, for joining us on Power Talks. Let me just insert here that this is something that all of us can be involved with. So if you haven't found a place yet to help, be patient, because as things develop, we will be offering more and more things that you can actually do, or places that you can actually volunteer in order to help those who are most vulnerable among us. These discussions are just that, they're discussions among us. But we'd love to see you continue the discussions at home and go one step further, get involved. Because when Power talks, you are empowered through the voice of truth. See you next time.
You just watched Power Talks, a Good Life 45 original production that makes you part of our Hope Team here on Good Life 45, where hope happens.